Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipson. Welcome to episode 188 of Sports Management Podcast. Today's guest is Dennis Fryer, the founder of Hustle Inc. Dennis is a sports business professional with experiences from Washington Capitals, Carolina Hurricanes, Baltimore Ravens, and more, before starting his own company, Hustle Inc. We spoke about how to build a winning team, his nickname Denny Hustle, empowering teams, his obsessive personality, the importance of preparation, and much more. Dennis Fryer, welcome to the Sports Management Podcast.
Thanks so much, Marcus. Very, very excited for our conversation here.
It's great to have you on the show. You are the founder of Hustle Inc. So can you tell us a little bit about what that is and what you do?
For sure. Yeah. First, I'll start with our tagline. And, really what that is empowering teams to move faster, be ambitious, and increase productivity. And, we partner with organizations across all of professional sports with a heavy concentration in NFL and MLS. But to actually kind of equate what we actually do, could really put that into two buckets. And I think the first one is is in the sales training capacity. And, I try not to use the word training, honestly, because I have the viewpoint that you train animals, but you coach people. So I view myself as a sales coach, but just for the listeners here, I'll try not to confuse people too much here. And, we'll go on site. We'll spend a few days with a client, spending time on, candidly, whatever they want to spend time on. And we build our focus and we tailor it specific to what teams deem as what I would call an area of opportunity. And then the second bucket is really on the consultant side of the business. And primarily we're working with leaders. And, I view myself also as a sales leader on speed dial, right? And what I mean by that is I'm another voice for leaders, another person to throw things by when it comes to sales strategy, and then ensuring that they're equipping their teams properly, whatever that might mean.
That's so interesting. You have worked on the team side and now you're running your own show. So, what's some experiences that you have brought with you from that job that you can now elevate and use in your current role?
For sure. Yeah. I feel like, in the sports realm, I've kind of came from what I would deem as maybe, some humble beginnings, right? I started in minor league baseball and, I'm very, very grateful. That was the first place that my career started. For a lot of reasons, right? I think I learned a lot of institutional knowledge there, but I also learned things that maybe I couldn't have learned at the big league level, right? Just being involved in every aspect of the business. For a young person, I felt like that was just so valuable. And maybe it didn't always feel like it at the time because there's a lot of effort and there's a lot of time and a lot of things that can be difficult about minor league baseball. And but I'm forever grateful. And, my boss there was John Bishop. And if you're not familiar with that name, he went on to be the AVP in the NBA, working with Teambo. And now he's actually the head of Playfly Sports. And, he was somebody that was just the ultimate leader. And I learned a lot of valuable lessons from him. And I just feel like I'm so blessed. And I think there's a constant trend in the trajectory of my career is that I've been blessed that I've worked with really some amazing people, some in my viewpoint, and I recognize the bias here, maybe some of the best leaders on the face of the earth. So I feel very, very grateful for that. I had the opportunity to start my career at the Durham Bulls. I spent 3.5 years there, but I had aspirations to work at the big league level. And I went to Washington. I worked with Monumental Sports. And for those folks that aren't familiar with that, really we had 4 properties, right? We had the Wizards, we had the Capitals, we had Georgetown, and then WNBA and the Mystics. And, when I got there and, candidly, I was looking around for the right opportunity. And I remember driving my car up to DC and I sat in a room and with a gentleman named Jake Reynolds and Ben Cobley. Jake is now the president of the New Jersey Devils, and Ben is overseeing all global partnerships for Harris Blitzer. And, they sat me in a room and they sold me on an idea. And they said, Dennis, you work hard, you do what you say you're going to do. We will get you where you want to go. And I walked out of that office, and this is going to make me sound a little soft maybe, but I remember my eyes getting like welled up in the elevator, leaving that office because I believed them and I knew what they were telling me was true. And thanks to amazing people like that, I'm working in the industry that I love, and they were people that were true to their word. And, I had the opportunity, to be there about 2 years. And I look at my time in DC as getting a PhD in sales, right? And it was an unbelievably valuable time. And even personally, I met my wife in DC. So really the most monumental time of my career, pun intended. I had the opportunity to leave there and I went to Carolina and I was the first inside sales manager for the Carolina Hurricanes. And my boss there is, I think, as good as any leader on the planet, Sarah Daniel. And she came from the NBA and built out what a lot of folks would call an NBA style sales setup in the NHL. And I learned so much from her. And spending time, my 3 years there was just amazing. And, from there, I had the opportunity to go to Baltimore. I was the head of sales for 5 years with the Ravens. And I always use this joke. So if there's people listening that know me, they're going to know it. Some people call it the Lamar Jackson era. I call it the Dennis Fryer era. But in all seriousness, him and I literally started the same week. And I'm forever grateful. And I felt like I was there at an excellent time where maybe for the first time in organizational history, just a little dip of excitement from the fan base. And for me, I saw that as just an absolute unbelievable opportunity for a great top tier organization that everything you've heard about them from the outside is true. I can personally attest. But to come there and have the opportunity to sell a product that really wasn't available for 2 decades because of the sellout status and things of that nature was just an incredible opportunity. And that leads me to what I'm doing here today.
That's fantastic and great to hear your backstory there. A lot of great leaders that you worked under, and now you mentioned that you are coaching employees. So you have had some good coaches yourself. So what are some qualities that you look for in a good employee?
For sure. I'll answer that first with a quote, and this is probably the quote that comes out of my mouth the most often, and it's a Doc Rivers quote. And average players want to be left alone. Good players want to be coached. Great players want to be told the truth. And I love that. And I think if you played any sort of organized sports in your life, you could really put yourself and every one of your teammates into one of those buckets very easily, right? And I look at that and well, what does that really mean from a professional perspective? It's like you need to be willing to hear the truth. And there's a quote that's circulating on the internet right now, and I really gravitated towards it because I think it's so accurate. It's like, be teachable. You don't know everything, and you're not always right. And I think that's a quote that I think we all need to hear, right? And it's great to have and grow professionally, but you'll never have it all figured out, right? And I think that to actually answer your question, Marcus, is like, what do I look for? We all use the terminology coachability, and I think that's a pretty common one in the sports world, and it makes sense why. But really, what that's saying is be willing to hear the truth. And I remember one of my first roles in DC. My boss sitting down with me, I was like, "Hey, Kirk, I need some feedback. Like, what do I need to be doing different?" And he looked at me, he's like, "You dress like crap." And I was like, wow, like that's like, you could make the claim that sounds kind of rude, but no, he meant that lovingly because he recognized that the way that I carry myself matters. I'm going into the office of a decision maker, and I'm in Washington, DC. I did have to look the part. So I remember, texting my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, Laura. I was like, "Hey, we got to go to the outlets this weekend. I got to get some new shoes." And, and we did that. But, I use that analogy or I use that example because it's like that on paper sounds like a rude thing to say, but I have to be willing to take that the right way and understand what he's saying and apply it. So I know that might not be exactly answering your question, but I think when you talk about, coaching and developing, you have to be willing to kind of look at yourself and evaluate and then take that to get better.
Yeah. No, it answers it definitely. And, being coachable, but also maybe to have like a growth mindset to be able to learn and wanting to learn. And what you said there for if someone gives you a criticism or something, to take that as something constructive that you can work on, like you did there with how you how you dressed or something, for example, instead of just taking it personal and be upset about it.
For sure. No question about it.
Super interesting. Is there a difference in training employees versus how you train managers?
I would say in my viewpoint, what I just described is really the answer to that, right? I think the first thing that I would say, and this is something that, my boss, Sarah, kind of ensured that it got in my brain as a young leader. So don't expect people to be like you, right? And I think we all are different, right? And, and one thing that I look at, even in just overarching in the sales coaching perspective, is I don't really believe in like the one size fit all approach, right? It's like, my job isn't to tell people like, here's the hustle way and I know everything. Like I just don't believe that, right? Because I do think that there's more than one way of doing things. And so I just don't subscribe to that, what I would deem as like a one size fit all approach. But ultimately, to answer your question, like I don't really look at those two things that dissimilar, because you have to have people that care, right? And whether they're a leader or they're a sales rep is irrelevant. They just have to care, and they have to your point, have that growth mindset to get better. Simple as that.
No, I like that. Now, in the current one, in your current business, how was it like to go from being an employee to being a founder and starting something on your own?
Yeah, it's been interesting, right? And I learned a lot along the way. And I would say, I was just reading this the other day, and either just talking about like, what is hard about being a entrepreneur. And they said for the first year that people aren't going to understand what you're doing. And I thought about that, deeply. And I said, that is right. And the other component of that is you're going to constantly make yourself look like an idiot. And I agree with that too. Right. And I look back and, I've never really wavered in what I'm doing. And to be candid, and this isn't like a boastful comment, I believe in myself, right? I know what I'm doing and I'm very capable. And we're hitting our 2-year milestone here, coming in the next couple of weeks. And maybe there's still people that don't understand. And that's okay, right? I think, simply put, the thing that I love about doing what I'm doing is that I get what I put into it. And I think that's a pretty fair trade-off. My viewpoint, that's how it should be. And that's, I think, something that made me gravitate towards sales. It's like, okay, let me get this straight. If I work a little bit harder than the person next to me, I can do better at my job. I can make more money. To me, that seemed correct, right? That seems like the way it should be. And, for me now, I have the ability where that now this is at, maximum, right? Everything that I do matters, and I get to control everything. I have control of every aspect of it. And, as much, just last night as an example of what I would say is like the things that I don't like about this. I'm doing I'm trying to finalize my P&L and my balance sheet, for my taxes, and I'm working at 11 o'clock at night. Like that stuff stinks, right? But I would rather work 150 hours a week for myself than 60 hours a week for anyone else, because it's my thing. And that's how I look at it.
So would you say that entrepreneurship is a meritocracy in a way that you said that? Like the more you put into it, like the more you get out?
I like to think that's true, and I'm sure that maybe it's probably not that black and white, unfortunately. At least in my viewpoint, but I do like, my thought always when I was a salesperson is like there was the sales cycle, and what I do now impacts what things look like in 2 weeks, right? If I have a great week of talking to a lot of people in 2 weeks, that phone is going to be buzzing, right? And I look at it in a lot of ways in my world, but it's not that small. And I would look at it like what I do today might impact what happens in October, right? So I'd look at it maybe in a different light, but in very similar vein, if that answers your question, Marcus.
Yeah, definitely. You work with different sports and clubs. Does your approach differ depending on if you're talking to a different team or a league or a sport?
Absolutely. And, and to just kind of hit on that a little bit, I think that's what makes us different. Right. And, when building this product out, I'm of the viewpoint that like the best products or best inventions solve a problem. Now, I'm not saying that I involve sales coaching. So if anybody's misconstruing that, that's not what I mean. But I did see that there's an opportunity to be a little bit different. And I think one of the things that we pride ourselves on is that we're not that one size fit all approach. And, I do want to say I have the utmost respect for the other people that are in this space that are doing things at a very, very high level for a long time. And in a lot of ways, I don't really view them as the competition. They motivate me to work harder, and I hope that I can do the same thing for them. But it's okay to have different products. And I think that the way that I view it is, we're going to have conversations with, insert team name here. And, we're going to build specific content and coaching based off of what their needs are. And I think that maybe that product and that angle is just maybe a little bit different than most. And again, no disrespect to the people that are really doing an amazing job, but I just think that the way that we get there is a little bit different.
So the name is obviously Hustle Inc. So what the meaning of hustle for you?
Yeah, well, I could probably answer that with a story. And to be candid, I really did not want to name the company that, right? That was not what I thought. And I know that sounds crazy. But as a young man, my nickname was Denny Hustle, right? And there's people listening to this, they're probably laughing because they can remember some of those days. And I built a reputation and a personal brand off of being a hustler, right? And there's really how that happened was in two ways. And when I was in Washington, I achieved a sales streak of 55 straight days of making a sale. And I remember being in the office sometimes at 11 o'clock at night, it really just to keep this meaningless sales streak alive. But it meant something to me, right? It didn't change anything, but in my mind, like if I set my mind to something, I'm going to do it, right? And I built a reputation off of that. I was on the company softball team, and if there was a ground ball, I was legging that thing out, and I was playing and running as hard as I possibly could. But when I built the business, I really didn't love the name, and even though now I think I actually do, but at the time, like I don't know if I really want to name it that. But I remember talking to my wife. I'm like, that name found me. Like I should probably build a brand off of that. And one of my favorite verses from scripture is Colossians 3:23, and it's whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. And to me, that is like the definition of that. And I'm a man of faith, and the way that I view things is out of a faith-filled lens. And that Bible verse to me is really how I approach everything.
Yeah, it's an interesting word, like with the hustle and what do like the energy I get from you. You said like you put your mind to something and you do it, and working as much as it takes. And for example, a guy like Elon Musk, now he's gotten very political, but like when he took over Twitter with X, that was one thing that he saw, like if someone didn't really hustle, then he didn't consider them part of his team. So when you're obviously a hustler, and now when you're building your team, do you try to find, like-minded individuals, or how are you building a winning team? Because if you take a sports metaphor, you might need, a defense and an offense and everyone with different skill sets. So how are you thinking when you're building your team?
Right. Just to use like an outdated like 80s movie reference, like I do believe in having like the Breakfast Club. Like there's value in having different kinds of people on a team. And again, like I don't expect anyone to be like me or think like me. And there's only one of me, and that's a good or a bad thing depending on how you look at it, right? But ultimately, I do want people that care, and I think that extends to the way that you approach things, right? So simply put, if you ask me what's the most important thing in hiring someone, it's finding somebody that cares, but that doesn't mean that they have to think and operate like I do. So hopefully that answers that a little bit.
Yeah, of course. How did you get into this industry? When did you start getting interested into sports, and how has your journey been like?
For sure. I think the first answer to that question, just to make fun of myself for a second, is I'm really not that athletic, right? And it's just the truth of it. And I love sports, but I recognized as a very young man that I wasn't going to become the center fielder for the Yankees like I thought that I would potentially be. So I had to pivot and use my brain because my body wasn't going to have the capability to do that. And the second part of it is, yes, I knew this is something I'm passionate about, but I look at myself as a young college graduate. I really didn't know what I was doing, right? And I look back, and I've said that I spoke at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill on Friday, and I made the claim to the class. I said, I would not hire a young version of myself, right? And it's just the truth. I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't have direction. I didn't know what I didn't know. And, looking back at it, it's, I came into the sports industry really having no clue, right? And I think even most people would claim that nobody, comes out of school wanting to work in sales. And I think part of that is we maybe don't understand what it really is. And the first job that I got in a sales capacity, I was kind of convinced into doing it. Like, Dennis, you know how to communicate with people. You could do this. I'm like, yeah, I guess they're probably right on that. And, I would say about 2 weeks into doing a sales type role, I realized, okay, like sales is not what I thought it was. And I do have maybe some of the characteristics or the skill sets that can make me successful at it. But I would say, to simply answer the question though, I don't think that I really I hadn't had this built out plan. And I'm so impressed. I'll talk to a 21-year-old person. They've had 3 internships and they know they want to do these jobs. Like, wow, like I was probably about 30 before I figured that out. Like, good for you, right? But I wasn't that person. And for me, I had to figure out the things that I like. And just as much, I had to learn the things that maybe I didn't want to do. And I was always passionate about working in this industry, right? We all love sport. And, there's that old cliche quote, like, oh, do a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life. I'm not sure I completely agree with that, but I agree with some of it, right? I do feel blessed that I get to do something that I love. And, anybody I talk to that does a job that's not in sports, they seem to not like it as much as me. So I feel very, very fortunate to be doing what I do, for sure.
Yeah. Because you have some other passions. I know you like traveling and some other things, but sports is obviously really a passion of yours.
No question. Yeah. I would say, it's the thing that really started my professional career. And I would say the longer I work in sports, probably the less sports that I watch. But I think a lot of people in this industry can appreciate that. I can't watch a game without wanting to know what kind of sponsorship activation that was. I can't watch a game and wonder, how did they price these seats on the glass? Like, I can't. Sometimes it takes the joy away because I'm almost too close to it. So I'm probably not watching sports like I did back in the old days, just out of I'm just too close.
No, I understand that completely. I work in the ice hockey industry and work with the equipment. So I'm watching a game and I'm trying to see what type of gear everyone is using. And, so,
Right.
as much as you're following the game.
For sure.
You have mentioned also that you have a little bit of an obsessive personality. I guess that can be like a bless and a curse. So how have you dealt with that in your professional life?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, my wife was joking around about that. I was listening to a song on repeat last night and she's like, you're obsessive. You like something and you just overdo it. And then she's right. And I would say, thankfully for me, I do think it's something I was born with, but thankfully for me, it's really only been reserved for positive things, right? I think it's important to differentiate. When I was a young man, I loved Bruce Springsteen. That was my guy. I didn't just go see him once. Like, I went and saw him 27 times in 13 different states in the United States. And, my wife and I went on our honeymoon and it's the first time I went to Italy. And now I've been to almost every country in Europe. Right. And like, I just, when I grab onto something and I enjoy it, I go full throttle. And I think that's just the way I am. But, just to provide context in the professional way is, I look at myself as like a student of the game. And I would take that a step further, is like, I look at myself also as like a traveling teacher. So I'm engulfed in what I'm doing and I have to be diving into sales books. I need to be listening to sports management podcasts and learn from other people that are doing things at a high level. But I love the quote, and you probably heard it from Jerry Rice, that today I'll do what others won't. So tomorrow I'll do what others can't. And I think that, I don't really know how to explain it other than this is just the way that I am. But that's how I look at everything. If I'm, and I remember my boss telling me, she's like, Dennis, you're either 0 or 100. She's like, you either really care about something or you don't care at all. And I think there's a lot of truth in that statement. I can't disagree.
Yeah. Same thing, like, talking about preparation. That's something that you're like very big on as well. So is that, does that go for all aspects of like life and work when you're, before a meeting, before a podcast, before a sales pitch?
Absolutely. I'm a believer that the more prepared I am, the more confident that I'm going to be. Right. So preparation equals confidence. And, if I'm getting ready to head on a client visit and, I'm traveling the next day, typically my wife's the one who has to tell me. She's like, Dennis, you're ready. You could probably stop reviewing your notes. And I'm glad that I have her kind of check me because she's always right. And she'll love hearing me say that she's always right when she listens to this back. But I'm just a believer in that, right? The more equipped I am, the more confident I'm going to be. So simply put, yes.
No, I completely agree. And it's always better to to have the information and maybe you don't need it than to need it and not have it, right?
No question about that. Yeah.
A lot of quotes. I like that, you're taking that. Do you have any type of, life motto or a specific, you have mentioned some quotes, but something that you live by?
Yeah, well, I would say I'm a man of faith, right? And that's what drives me. It's the most important element of me. And my favorite Bible verse is, many are the plans of a man's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. And I look at it in that way. And I think that's how I approach everything that, I'm not the ultimate decision maker, as much as I like to think I am. And I think the other thing, and there's a quote that it's a quote, but it's also a motto, is the way you do anything is the way you do everything. And I think that's a Tom Waits quote. And I think that's true, right? And I think about that, and especially what I'm doing now. It's like the way I do anything is the way I do everything. So it checks me, right? It makes me evaluate the way that I approach whatever I put my name on, right? So those are probably the two things that I would say is the way that I look at the world and the business world as well.
Talking about career, very driven, a lot of successes, worked for, many big organizations, now being a successful entrepreneurs. But has there been any bumps on the road in your career? And if so, how did you overcome them?
For sure. I look back and I could probably sit here for an hour and give you some examples, but out of respect for the people listening, I won't do that. I look at my time in DC as one that is just so interesting, right? And I walked in a room and there's 18 people that are doing the exact same job as me. And just to kind of back up, previously I had some sales experience coming from the minor leagues, and I thought that I was better than I was, right? And I think that's a hard lesson to learn, right? It's like, I thought that I was really good, and it was a humbling time to be there. And I walked in this room of 18 people, and I remember looking around thinking, I might be the least talented person in here. I remember thinking that, and I could go around, I'm like, they're good at this. And they all had things that I really felt like I didn't have. And I remember about a couple days in of being there thinking, did I make a mistake? Like, should I have, I had a good situation and now I came up here and I have to compete with these people that are really, really good. And a lot of these people are, running teams across the country right now. So I was right. They were really good and they were more talented than me. But I look at it like, well, what was my strength? And I think I know what it is, right? I had the ability to work harder, right? And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way to other people, but that was my strength, right? That I had, we always talk about like the controllables, and the things that I could control is my attitude and I could control my effort, right? And I knew that. And if I went into it with that mentality, like I was going to be successful. So, I remember being in there, and every day or every couple of days, I would kind of zone in on a different person. Like, all right, I'm going to beat so-and-so today. And I had this like competitive thing in my brain that I didn't really share with others. And it was my goal. Just, I love them, inside and outside of work, but I wanted to beat you. Right. And that was the way that I looked at it. And I still maintain that all those people in that room were more talented, but I was able to use what I was good at, and I was able to be successful that way. So that's the first one. And I think the other one is what I've already kind of hit on, is the beginning of the business. People maybe not just fully understanding what I was doing. And it's not an easy place to be, right? Where, I was so blessed, and I had, so many great places that I worked with, so many great people. But now I'm not attached to a logo. I'm not attached to an NFL brand or an NHL brand. And, in a lot of ways, I remember somebody telling me this, and I had a buddy that started a business. He said, Dennis, you don't have as many friends as you think you do. Right. And I don't mean that in a mean way, and I don't want to go negative here, but it did really make me think. And when I launched the business, I realized, okay, like I got to roll up my sleeves. Like the fish don't just jump in the boat. I got to go catch them. And for me, I recognized that quickly that, building a brand and a business is hard, because I was used to being behind a very, very an international brand. And now I'm nothing. Right. So I recognize that, those bumps along the way are now are making us stronger. But ultimately, when I look back at those times, like I had to be okay with looking like an idiot, and I probably did, right? And maybe maybe I still do, but hopefully not.
I'm sure you don't, but I guess that then networking comes in handy, right? Because as you said, like you don't have this brand to lean on anymore, but you have your personal brand and the connections that you have made from the other jobs that you have had, and maybe that's something that you could try bring with you into Hustle Inc.
I think so. And this, as well as anyone, Marcus, this industry is not that big, right? You look at, I live in just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, and there's probably, 400 software companies in this market alone, right? Maybe more than that. I'm making up a number, but there's not that many professional sports teams and leagues. Like there's really not that many of us. And, if you've been around long enough, you probably know a lot of people, and that doesn't make you special. It's just that we're all still standing. Right. And I looked at it in the first slide of like, jumping on or just looking at my existing relationships. And I feel really fortunate that there's a few people that really, really were supportive and they understood and they were going out of their way to set up introductions and set up conversations when they didn't even have to do that. And I don't forget those things, right? And I'm just so appreciative to some of the folks that just really, really supported what we were doing out of the gates.
Yeah. Something else I thought about is you mentioned now you live in North Carolina. You also lived in Washington. You're originally from Long Island, New York.
Yep.
So you traveled, moved around quite a bit. Has that been something that's, been difficult, or is only good to, experience new places, or how's that been like?
I mean, I think it's amazing, right? And I think that traveling is good for the soul, and I think that sometimes moving around professionally is good for the soul too, right? And I think you learn a lot about yourself. It forces you to grow. I view myself as an introvert, which I think would probably surprise some people that I talk to, but I do, and I think that especially as a younger man, like moving around and going to new market, trying new things, it forced me to get out of my own way a little bit, right? So I think it's an amazing thing. I think it's been great for me. I'm here in North Carolina now, and for now the third time in my life, I'm not moving again. I'm going to stay here because it's a wonderful place to live. But I feel really blessed that I've been able to jump around and see some different places.
I'm sure a lot of experiences from different places. And we talked a lot about also in the beginning about different. You have had a lot of managers and bosses that learned a lot from. What are some advice, like, or what's the best advice that you've been given, or maybe that you received?
Wow. Well, and I'll probably disrespect somebody by not dropping their name, but I would say right out of the gates, my Brian Samorka was someone in my first job, and he's now the assistant athletic director at NC State. He said to me, he's like, the more you're dentist, the more people are going to buy from you. And I think about that all the time. Right. And the reason that it's important is that it gives me permission to be myself every day. Right. And I don't think that extends to just sales, even though I think that that's a great sales lesson. Right. I'm making the claim that no two salespeople are the same. There's not a one size fit all approach, which I believe wholeheartedly. But I do believe that we buy from people. Right. And the more that I would insert my personality, the more I'm a little different. I'm a little quirky. And that works for me, right, in the sales, because people buy from people. And then the other side of it is, forget about selling a product. Like, be yourself, right? And I joked around about, you wanting to have the breakfast club. That's good, right? You're allowed to have different kind of folks. And, when Brian said that to me, I was like, wow, that's like, a revelatory thing. It seems so simple, but it's what I really needed to hear, because I think I didn't really understand that at that level or at that point just yet. And, I think the other thing, and I could sit here and probably say 50 things that are great advice. But when I was in Baltimore, I learned do things you don't have to do. Right. And I think that is just a great lesson. I dropped the Jerry Rice quote here a few minutes ago, and I think that's an example of that. But do things you don't have to do. There's power in that. So I think those would probably be the big two.
Yeah. No, that's a good one. Because sometimes, you talk about like, what's my job description, and you want to work within your square. But as you said, maybe to move outside and do something that you don't actually have to do. But that I think it pays back in, twofolds.
No question.
Is there something I haven't asked you thus far that you would like to mention?
I would just say, simply put, this industry is so competitive. And, when I was coming into it, everybody wants to work in sports. Like, why wouldn't they? Right. And the people that are doing it are the ones that just don't give up on the dream. Right. It's really easy to do that because it's difficult to get a job. And, I'm sure you've heard, last lecture by Randy Posh, and his thing is, those brick walls are there for a reason. Right. And they're not there to keep us out. It's to keep out the people that don't want it enough. And I'm butchering that quote, but I think about that. If there's people that are, trying to aspire to work in this industry, or they're just into it for a year or two, but trying to figure out whether they want to continue to do it, just don't give up. And I think that's just simple advice. And if you want something, like, then go get it. Right. And again, to zoom back to what I said before, like, the fish just don't jump in the boat. And I think if you want it, you have to go get it. And I know for me, I feel that way of, I'm not that special. Right. And I'm honored to be here, but I'm not that special. Right. I just didn't give up. And I think that's fared me well. And that would be my advice to anybody that's listening. Don't give up.
That's a great advice. I love that. So I like to end these chats with a networking question. So is there someone from your network that you think would be a good guest on this podcast?
I knew you were going to ask that because I did my preparation, as you know, and I've listened to a lot of this show before, which, by the way, I think you do a great job. So again, I do want to thank you for having me. And, I would probably say there's two people, and I want to answer this question maybe differently than some of the other folks before. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening in collegiate sports in North America, and that is evolving so quickly. And I dropped the name of my first boss in Durham, John Bishop, who now is the head of Playfly Sports. He's someone that means a great deal to me. He's an amazing human being, and you might have read about this just last week. Playfly Sports just partnered with Texas A&M. They secured a $15 million multimedia deal. And he's the charge of that. I think he's an amazing person because that landscape is changing so much. And the other angle I'd probably tell you to go is, I think there's a lot of really exciting stuff happening at the university level, right? I live very close here to University of North Carolina, so I get exposure to that daily. But Dr. Nels Pop, who's a professor and he oversees all their sports management, I think you'd be pretty blown away with their dedication and what they're trying to do to what I claim is like preparing the future of the sports industry. So those are two people that every time I talk to them, I walk away motivated. So I would probably tell you one of those guys for certain.
That's fantastic. Dennis, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Your energy is contagious. And, I hope you have inspired the listeners as much as you have inspired me. So again, thank you so much for taking the time.
No, thank you for having me. I'm honored. I can't even believe you asked me to be here. So thank you. Thank you for having me today. That's for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.